Hey guys, welcome back to Ken Michaels Radio, where we talk about the Beatles all the time. And we can talk about their years together, their solo years, anything we feel like here on this channel. Some of the shows are one-on-one conversations, some of them are panel discussions, and that certainly is the case with tonight's show. We have a panel discussion, and it's going to be a pretty interesting one. What I'm going to ask my guests on the show to do is to name their top 5 solo Paul McCartney songs that are lesser known songs from his catalog that he has either written or co-written. And this could be anything post-Beatles. Could be Wings, could be the Fireman, whatever they like, as long as it's original. Lesser known songs that they feel truly merit classic status. What they think is top tier McCartney, songs that everybody should know as being among the best of Paul's solo career. And we've got some heavy hitters on the show tonight, and we've also got a few fresh faces. Let's first of all introduce Glen Burtnik. Glen, you know from recent years being a member of the Weeklings. He is lefty Weekling. And the Weeklings have put out, well, I have in front of me, studio albums. The first one right here.
Look at that.
Which is monophonic. What's that?
No,
Studio
big.
2, 3. And they've been a part of a whole bunch of tribute CDs on Gem Records. All 3 of the studio albums are on Gem. They're on a John Lennon tribute CD. They're on one for Brian Wilson and also for Pete Townsend, where they covered I Can See for Miles. This is the John Lennon one here. Didn't have everything at my disposal here. And those of you who watch this channel will also know that recently I had Bob Berger on the channel to talk about his most recent solo CD called The Domino Effect, also on Gem Records. And I know the Weeklings have a brand new single they just released. But before we talk about that, let's welcome Glen. Welcome to Ken Michaels Radio.
Great to be here in the modern futuristic way of being anywhere.
Yeah, I've had the privilege of interviewing you several times for my radio show, Every Little Thing. You've been on the podcast show, Things We Said Today. This is the first time we've done it on camera. And yeah, it's great to connect once again. There is a brand new single that you've just released, and there's a new video too, for this Beatles song called I've Just Seen a Face. And before we do that, for anyone who isn't familiar with the Weeklings, explain what the whole music is all about, because I don't know any Beatles fan that wouldn't enjoy the Weeklings music.
Yeah, it almost came together by accident. I would do these theatrical shows where I would celebrate the 45th anniversary of the release of Sgt. Pepper, and the next year I do the 45th anniversary of the release of the White Album, so on. And so annually I would do these theater shows, and I would have a big, a string section or whatever was needed. And then I kind of ran out of those, and it was time to do the 50th anniversaries of things. And so one show was the first 2 Beatle albums. And you don't need a choir, you don't need a string section, you don't need a horn section for those. You basically need 4 guys and occasionally some percussion and a keyboard, a piano, And so it was during that show that there was only, for the most part, there were only 4 of us on stage. And we really enjoyed the process because we carefully studied all of the arrangements, the instrumentation, and we actually came to this realization that not only are those albums great for all the reasons that we always thought, the excitement, the energy, the youthful, the songwriting, but also the arranging was really, really well done. It's a quartet that was well arranged, and perhaps George Martin had a lot to do with that, perhaps not. But in any case, we really enjoyed that. And after that show was over, I said, well, why don't we just, why don't we get together and keep doing this? Like, we'll just play in bars because it's only four of us.
Mm.
We'll just put a bar band together. So we were, at that point, we were your typical tribute act. We were trying to cop all of the music note for note. And then so we started to play gigs for the fun of it. And then we said, well, if we're playing these gigs, why don't we have some merchandise to sell? So let's make a CD. And when we started working on the CD, we said, let's throw in some songs that we've written, because Bob Berger and I have written a lot of material before for years, and we've had cuts by other artists and things. So we added some originals, but we said, well, let's only do originals as if the 80s and the 90s never happened. And let's go back to thinking in the terms of the 60s when the Beatles existed. And so then we kind of became this group that was emulating 60s Beatles. And then another thing we did was we started looking up Beatles songs or Lennon McCartney songs that the Beatles didn't actually get around to finishing or recording. And so we released a number of those. We recorded a number of those. The one of the high points was the recording sessions that we did at Studio 2 at Abbey Road. We flew over and we recorded there in Ground Zero, the Holy Land. And that was just, high point of life, really doing that. So now where we're at, after releasing a number of records that have originals on them, some Beatles songs on them, we're also looking back at the Beatles and saying, well, let's take some chances and let's rearrange some Beatles songs. And we've done some challenging ones. Like one I'm very proud of is What's the New Mary Jane we recorded. We put it through some changes. It's not the way you remembered John Lennon doing it, but we did that, and we did the same thing with The Word, and we rearranged Baby You're a Rich Man, which a lot of people like that version. And then the latest thing that we did of that ilk was I've Just Seen a Face, which you mentioned earlier. It just came out, and the video is doing pretty well on YouTube right now, and it's people like it, so I'm proud of that.
Now the video, you do something that well, you're kind of copying The Simpsons, because you're playing on the rooftop.
Yeah, it's the Simpsons is where we got that idea. The truth of the matter was, I was at the Fest for Beatles Fans, and these two girls got up in a look-alike contest. And one, they were dressed and look very much like, one was obviously a McCartney and the other one was obviously a Lennon. These girls looked like those two. And when I saw them, I was just like, oh my God, what a vision. And I said, we have to make a video with these girls. So that was really the initial idea. What are we going to do with these girls? And so at the time, Get Back had just come out. And so the whole rooftop thing was kind of fresh in everybody's minds. It took us a couple of years to finally finish the whole concept because the video just came out. But in any case, we had this idea of having four female Beatles playing on a rooftop. And so that's, and then we asked around, we had to find a rooftop. And and we had some work to do to pull it together. But anyway, the video is kind of popular right now, and it's basically the band, us playing on the rooftop, and these girls take over and kick us off our instruments, and you end up seeing these female Beatles, although kind of female Beatles.
And one of them happens to be Skylar Moody, who's been a guest here on this channel, who has her own
Okay.
TikTok channel where there's a lot of Beatles content on there. So that was a nice surprise when I saw that in the video.
She's great. Yeah, great.
Your arrangement is very punkish of I think
You
of
think?
I've Just Seen a Face,
Yeah.
but I always like different arrangements of Beatles songs. But so what are the plans ultimately? You're going to make an album, because I think you told me you were going to release, a few singles at a time.
Yeah, I think that for better or worse, the album is an antiquated format, and I love albums, but to be honest, I don't listen to new artists or new albums. I do listen to new artists, but not their entire album. I usually glom onto one or two tracks at most. Even when I really love an artist, there's just there's so much data, so much content out there today, and that's for better and worse. And so in any case, in terms of what you do as an artist, as an act, as a band, releasing albums just ain't what it used to be. In fact, I mean, I was impressed just now when you held up CDs, and I'm like, oh, okay, so there's a guy with a CD player. Like that's like a rare thing. I think it is. In fact, I'm not sure where I would go to buy a CD player, and I actually need one right now. I have vinyl, and but and I love my vinyl, and I was listening to it a lot, but I have been completely seduced into the world of digital, press the button, tell the internet what you'd like to hear and listen.
Okay.
So therefore I'm not really listening to a lot of albums. And when I do, typical old guy thing, I listen to old albums. So in any case, so blah blah blah. So the plan is we will get more mileage out of each song if we record them one at a time, which is a throwback to the way music was before Sgt. Pepper, basically. When albums were a collection of singles a lot of times, and so that's where we're at. I think in 2023, I think that singles matter, and albums. I mean, again, the format. What is the format for albums right now? I don't know. You certainly, it's hard to sell albums, I would think.
You didn't want to go the Ringo route and do EPs?
That's a good idea. but I don't have an EP player. Just kidding. But in any case, yeah, that's kind of where our thinking is at. One song at a time is all anybody can handle.
Okay. Well, I do want to recommend listening to the CDs or vinyl the old-fashioned way, and all Beatle fans will love the original stuff. And just to give people a little idea of when you did the more obscure Lennon-McCartney songs, we're talking about That Means a Lot, If You Got Trouble, I'm in Love, 1 and 1 is 2. Really cool stuff, Because I Know You Love Me So. Not the typical stuff. And then when you do the more familiar songs, they're different arrangements, which I think is a great idea. So before we move on, I want to make sure everybody knows that you should know Glen's face if you go to the Fest for Beatles Fans, because he's been a part of the band Liverpool for many, many years. He is the Paul guy. He is the bassist, and you do a great job every time.
Well, thank
Glen, are you still part of the orchestra?
Absolutely. Yeah. Which is a ELO offshoot. which is basically, it very much features the original violinist Mick Kaminsky.
Hmm.
Yeah, really, that's a really fun band.
I've always, I've
Playing the
always,
music.
I've always looked at it sort of being because there was the Electric Light Orchestra Part 2 that Bev Bevan
Yes.
started up, and this sort of like was the offshoot of that band, right? It's
Right,
sort of
right.
when Bev
That's right.
Bevan retired,
Yes.
that was the end of
Yes.
ELO Part 2, and
Yes. And also it was really, I wonder if I'm legally supposed to talk about this. Jeff Lynne, who had retired from really being an artist and retired Electric Light Orchestra, you know,
Mhm.
a couple of decades earlier,
Hmm.
had decided to break out the brand again. And he was integral in Bev leaving ELO Part 2, and Jeff made it clear that he did not want there to be, he no longer wanted there to be a band called ELO Part 2. So the band at the time, the original bass player from ELO, passed away right around the same time as all of this. He passed away, and I got the phone.
You're freezing up there, Glenn.
Got
right, Jeff Lynne is interfering with the connection here, Glenn. You're
He
frozen.
is.
Jeff, let him
So-
talk. Come on.
So what you should do is probably just X out and try to get back in with the Zoom link that we
Well,
sent
this-
you, if you can
No,
hear
wait,
me.
wait,
Okay.
there's movement. What'd you say about not being able to edit, Ken?
That's true.
well, he is my internet service provider, so maybe that says that.
Wait.
Am I frozen?
Yeah,
My
you're
face is
frozen,
frozen,
aren't I?
but we're
Now
hearing
your
you.
voice
It's
is
fine.
appearing. This is kind of getting like,
Okay,
Yeah,
there we
whoa.
go. You're back.
It's normal
You're back.
again.
Okay,
Is it working?
we're good. We're good.
I'm
Somebody
sorry,
drove
guys.
by
I don't know
your
what to
house
do.
with, I don't know, jamming equipment.
Maybe.
Anyway,
Jeff
so
Lynne.
you
So-
actually, do we pick
Yeah.
up? Or we just keep
Yeah,
going?
yeah,
we
we'll
love
keep
these
going, but how often do you play out with the orchestra?
Oh, it's probably once or twice a month,
Oh, very
and
good.
it's all over the world. I've been to Moscow and Chile and all over the world. We were just in Switzerland recently.
Mm.
So that's a really fun gig.
I'll
It's a
bet.
good band, and I get to see the world, which is lovely.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Let me introduce to you Edward Crawford. He is the host of Call Me Mr. Broadstreet. This is another Beatles podcast, fairly new. And he was nice enough to invite me on his podcast. So now he's on mine. And first of all, just want to know why you actually named the podcast what you did.
Yeah, sure. I'll go with it. Well, I've been doing the YouTube channel about a year and a half at this point. Just kind of bouncing around some names, and I thought, well, I've always kind of liked No More Lonely Nights, as you can see to my left over here. So I thought, well, what's a good name? And I seem to have a lot of Broad Street stuff, so I thought, well, call me Mr. Broadstreet. Ran it by some family members internally, and they were like, yeah, that sounds good. So you know what, that's kind of how I came up with it. I thought kind of unique, kind of something to set it apart a little bit. But yeah, basically because I enjoy Broad Street and just thought it was a good name.
Okay. And your podcast is mainly on Paul, or I think it's Paul and the Solo Beatles.
It's mostly solo stuff. I try to do all of the solo career. I do delve into the group stuff, but I think really trying to give the solo stuff a bit more prominence, especially from my perspective, I guess, as a Gen X fan and kind of coming of age in the 80s and 90s. and just really highlighting that, because I think that has been kind of, maybe a little bit overshadowed, maybe for obvious reasons, from the Beatles stuff that we have out there, which is great. I mean, Get Back is great, anthology, everything like that. But, I think really shedding light on the solo years, and there's a lot of good stuff in the solo years.
Tell me about it. I've been on and on about that for over 40 years on the radio. So your introduction to the Beatles was more through the solo music than the group?
Yeah, it was. It's funny when I tell this story. My stepmom was like, my dad tells me later, oh, I was a fan, but not that big of a fan. But I think, I heard it, through my dad, kind of growing up, and seeing the stuff hearing a little bit on radio, and then of course seeing, the stuff on MTV. I think it took a while for me, much younger, obviously, to connect. Oh, that's the solo stuff. Oh, wait, those are the same guys in Beatles.
Right.
Younger time seeing it, but kind of seeing it when MTV was playing videos, of course. Certainly I can remember, Got My Mind Set on You, Cloud Nine. Paul's kind of earlier stuff from the early '80s. I think some of the John stuff, especially around the Milk and Honey period.
Right.
When you would see the retrospectives and stuff like that on MTV. But I think the thing that really pushed me over the edge was July 4th, 1990, RFK Stadium, first rock concert, Paul McCartney during the 1989-1990 World Tour.
Wow.
14-year-old me, my mind was just blown. And you know what? I haven't looked back since. That's what really started the collecting wave with me, and just, going full force into it.
Very nice. And for anyone that follows the work that I do, I love to hear the perspectives of younger fans who may not have grown up, everything in chronological order from the 60s on up, because, you have different opinions based on what you're exposed to at an early age. If everything's thrown at you all at once, the solo and the group, you could have a completely different opinion of this catalog. Anyway, let's move on to my partner in crime over at the Things We Said Today podcast, DARREN DeVIVO, who's been on New York's WFUV for almost 40 years. Hello, Darren. It's always great to have you aboard.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to meet Edward and to finally get to talk at length with Glenn, who I've seen around for, going back to the Bottom Line shows that you used to do.
Wow.
I had a bunch of those back in the day. So thanks for inviting me, and here I is.
Yeah.
And it is almost it's actually going to be 39 years in about my 39th anniversary on WFUV will be we're 1 month away from 39.
Yeah.
Evidently
And
enough.
as I like to say quite frequently on Things We Said Today, it's quite miraculous when anybody in this business, well, in any business, can stay with the same company for a long time, and especially in radio, where DJs bounce around from one market to another. And you've been on, like you said, it's 39. It's going to be 39 years soon.
They've tried hard to get rid of me. No, I'm kidding. It's just happened. You know what I mean? I am extremely fortunate and very blessed to be, they say you have to have obviously some talent. You have to have ability. Luck isn't bad. Timing's just as good. And, just I happen to be on more than one occasion at the right place at the right time as the station was making changes through these years. So, the WFUV of the 80s and the WFUV of today is completely different. The only thing really in common is me and the call letters. I mean, that's really it. But it's been a very it freaked me out recently because WFUV recently just celebrated its 75th anniversary. It signed on in 1947.
Wow.
And when I did a little math, very little, and came up with the realization that I've been part of WFUV for 52% of the station's existence. That's more than half. That's just like, I just needed to go lay down and, because I'm like, this is just so freaking ridiculous. It's like, first of all, how would the years go? And I'm in the same place. And So yeah, thank you, Ken. And my love's been the Beatles, and it's been able to give me this stuff that we've got going on right now. It's
Okay.
been able to give me an outlet to kind of, share my
Yeah.
love of the Beatles in addition to what I do at WFUV.
And I've always loved your input on our podcast. So every now and then you'll be here on this channel too. There's one thing I want to take care of before we start about talking about McCartney solo music, because I know how forgetful I can be. It's a little surprise for Glenn. For 10 years, I was on WDHA in New Jersey. And one time, Glenn did an interview on WDHA. I think it was with Kathy Millar, if I'm not mistaken. And I have this. You performed This Boy at the radio station.
Wow.
And they evidently recorded it on cart, which I used to play
Ah,
on my radio show on WDHA once in a
Wow.
while.
Yeah,
So I still have it right here. Can't do anything with
Wow.
it.
yeah.
So anybody that wants to sell me a cart machine, please let me know. But this is your recording here from the 80s of This Boy on WDHA.
You remember?
do you remember? No, I don't remember it. In fact, Ken, do you remember it?
I wasn't there.
Like-
I didn't know that you were at the station when it happened. I found that after the fact. So
I mean, so did I sing it solo, or did I bring two of the guys from my band with me? Because I
No,
think
there
of that
was a
song
band.
very much.
there
There was a band. So
Yeah.
all right, so there was three parts. We did the Beatle thing. Yeah, interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, I was like a different artist then, kind of.
So
I had big hair. I had hair.
Yeah.
so a part of WDHA lives with me in this room all the time.
I
This
think
part's right here.
we should probably, just for the folks who don't get it, that looks very much like an 8-track tape,
True.
which they are. There was a kind of an industry thing that they were tapes that were used in radio for a variety of purposes, and they malfunctioned all the time at WFUV in the 1980s, which made for some incredibly embarrassing but some very funny moments. Yeah, that's a nice little treasure
You,
you
you
got
know,
there.
now that's a format that I would think, you would think that you could go on eBay or something and people are giving them away, but it's been so long. It reminds me of what happened to all of the vinyl pressing plants and all of that.
Yeah.
Everything got smashed up. All these incredible machines got smashed up. And now if you want to put out a record, you have to wait until Adele or Taylor Swift uses
Right.
up, are done
That's true.
using all the vinyl, because there's only a handful of vinyl cutting machines left in the world now. So, but that's a format I've never thought about. Who's got a cart machine?
Right.
What a trip that is,
Well, the
Wow.
thing with the carts was that at FUV we only had mono carts, but most radio stations had stereo carts, and I even think there were some, maybe the hit stations like WABC FM, not WFM, WABC AM in New York City, 77. I think, and some of those stations, everything they played was on cart. They would record the singles onto the cart, and that was it. DJs on touch vinyl. It was old carts, which were like handling 8-tracks. And, if you had mono ones and you maintained the equipment, I could imagine it sounded fine on the radio. But when you had old mono ones like we did.
I was part of those days playing carts on music, not
Yeah.
necessarily at WDHA. Some songs they put there, especially Christmas music, I remember. Some
Yeah.
Christmas songs they put on cart. But anyway, a little blast from my past, and you're a part of it, Glenn. Anyway, so let's move on to talking about Paul McCartney here on the show. I'm asking my guests to come up with 5 songs, lesser known songs from Paul's solo career that they think deserve to be considered classics. They have to be written or co-written by Paul. And so why don't we start with Glenn?
Okay. It's kind of a hard, it's a really hard list to make.
Hmm.
I got it down to 5, but I really, it wants to be 6, but also it's a little intimidating if I'm talking to guys like you three. It's well, you guys, well, we all know all of these songs probably,
Mhm.
and so what is lesser known? But in any case, I do love a lot of the work of Paul that aren't hits. In fact, some of his hits I don't like as much, but the one thing that really comes to mind for me lately is the Jeff Emmerich mix of the demo that Elvis Costello and Paul McCartney did of the songs Lovers That Never Were.
Oh, wow.
I think that Paul's vocal, not the version that he put on his album when he cleaned it up and all,
Mhm.
but this Paul's vocal on this demo, it's right up there with, I don't know, Helter Skelter or something, like his screamers, Oh Darling or something.
Right.
Incredible and a very passionate song. But that's one that that particular version and Jeff Emmerich's mix, because he did kind of clean up the demo a little bit, but that's number one for me lately. That's I've spent the last couple of years just drooling over how great that particular track is.
Do you prefer when it was just Paul and Elvis together, or Paul with the band doing the Elvis songs? Because you have the two different
Yeah,
discs there.
I prefer the rawness
Oh.
of the demo, and
Mm.
and I think that McCartney's voice is in just it's like the high point. It's like when his voice was perfect,
Mhm.
I think.
Yeah.
But so there's that. That's number one.
Okay.
Let's see. I'll get a little more out. Well, that's a little outside, but I really like a song called Nothing Too Much, Just Out of Sight,
Okay.
off the Fireman Electric Arguments record.
Mhm.
And that's typical, and that's closer to a Helter Skelter McCartney, which is something that there's that side of McCartney that I feel is kind of gets forgotten, because he's written these incredible classic songs like Yesterday and Blackbird, and a lot of beautiful romantic stuff. He's thought of maybe as much as a balladeer, more so than being a rocker. And the dude can do all of those. He can do both. And when I hear him screaming and wailing electrically, it's refreshing to me.
Right.
It reminds me of how rocking this guy was, and what a great Little Richard he's capable of, and all of that stuff. So Nothing Too Much, Just Out of Sight. I I I just tell everybody all the time, go listen to that one.
Okay.
Number 3, off of Red Rose Speedway, Little Lamb Dragonfly. I was in a band with Jan Hammer, who was a keyboard player with the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and he did a number of things with Jeff Beck. And after he had done those things, I joined his band. We put out an album, and I got to know Jan pretty well. And me onto that song. He played me that song in his living room one time, and I had missed it somehow. I guessed that by the time Red Rose Speedway came out, I was looking elsewhere. I was probably listening to Fusion because I was into Jan Hammer and guys like
Right.
that, Jeff Beck and stuff. And but in any case, Little Lamb Dragonfly is it's as good as anything, any commercial hit record that Paul's ever done. I just think it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
I personally love Bip Bop off of Wildlife. I can't get enough of that track. So what's that, number 4?
That would be 4.
And yeah, it's number 4. And yeah, I just think I love it, and I love Linda in it, and it's just the quirkiest sing-along kind of kid song ever. So then there comes to number 5, which is the really hard part. I want to say Jenny Wren because it's so beautiful, but I also think that it's kind of better known. It might have even been a single.
It was a single, but it wasn't a hit.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I'll go with Tomorrow on Wildlife, which I really love, which almost sounds like, another artist, the way he sings in his voice. But I love Tomorrow on Wildlife. And I've done that live from time to time. But anyway, there you go. 6 songs.
Those are interesting choices. And I just had a sneaking suspicion. I think I know Darren's tastes pretty well. Because Little Lamb Dragonfly is one of my choices, and I have a feeling it might be one of his, but I just definitely think that's one of his absolute masterpieces. And just the fact that he's so much this guy who can come up with these separate songs that somehow flow together so well that you'd think that it was all one piece, that he wrote them all together all at once. And it's so beautiful melodically. His voice is incredible, and the harmonies.
Yes.
And Denny Sywell has said that he helped out with the arrangements with the harmonies, and in particular with the call and answer with the I'm flying, can't you see me, I'm flying. That was supposed to be Denny's idea, but absolutely brilliant. A lot of people really cut down bebop, so I'm kind of surprised that you would mention that. And even Paul said recently, like, it was one of his worst songs, or where was I when I wrote bebop. So, but is it
Great.
what exactly is it about it? It's just the charm of it, or what exactly?
Yeah, well, first of all, I can't compare it to anything, I don't think. It doesn't, in a way, you could say, well, it's kind of like a kid's record or something, but I don't know any other, I can't think of any other song that is anything like it. It is very charming. It sounds like, you're sitting in Paul's dining room with him on guitar, and he just came up with something, and his wife, while she's doing the dishes or something, she chimes in with little parts and here and there. But I don't know. It's great. I just love it.
Okay. You guys want to comment about Glenn's choices?
The fact that Glenn picked Tomorrow reminds me of the fact that Tomorrow and I Am Your Singer from Wildlife are, if there ever was an instance where McCartney had 2 songs that should have been significant in his catalog, whether that means a hit, whatever the case might be. Tomorrow and I Am Your Singer, I think, are two examples of those type songs. Also, the other side of the coin is, McCartney is so insanely talented that these songs that people would probably cut their arms off to have, other musicians would like sell their souls to have, were just album cuts.
Yep.
You know what I mean? On deep cuts on albums that didn't even get good reviews, or didn't sell as they could have or should have.
Right.
And Bebop is just catchy as hell. I mean, I think that's one where McCartney is very good at making those cutesy songs that make you cringe, make me cringe. Bebop was one that wanted to go that way and didn't for some reason, and just became, I don't know. It also could have been when it was released too, because I've often talked about how, you remember those songs that you discovered when you were young that helped make the bedrock of what you'd listen to and what we like today. For me, Wildlife was one of those earlier discoveries for me, when I was still barely, not even at my teens yet. So, refreshing hearing Tomorrow get picked.
Yeah.
Great
Edward?
album. Great album.
Yeah,
Any comments?
I'm thinking with Lovers That Never Were, that demo. That's a killer demo on the box set. And I guess, Darren,
Yeah.
I pick up a little bit on your point. I mean, Flowers in the Dirt comes out. Yeah, I'm probably, 14, 15, something like that.
Okay.
Great
Yeah.
record. I know Lovers That Never Were, we're obviously on, Off the Ground, which is hard to believe it's coming up on its 30th anniversary. But that demo, really powerful, really great. It shows an album that could have been with Paul and kind of Elvis Costello had they done a more stripped down album, at that point in the 80s. Even though Paul was probably going for a little bit more of a bigger, late 80s, early 90s sound. But great choice. That's all I can say. Just a great choice.
Okay, very interesting. I talk every now and then, I even did on the last show, about the growing appreciation for McCartney's music pre-Band on the Run. And there are a lot of people who love that simple acoustic stuff that he came up with, whether it's Bip Bop or Heart of the Country or Hey Diddle or songs like that. And Bip Bop certainly fits in that category. Like, you're there on the farm with him. He's taking out the acoustic,
Yeah.
He's barefoot, he's playing.
Well, let me add this. The nonsense of it really isn't that much different than Bebop-a-lula, a Wop Bam Boom. It's completely primitive man kind of songwriting, but it's beautiful. I like it.
Okay. I think Bebop-a-lula, those songs, have deep meaning.
Okay.
or Little Richard that you mentioned. All right, Edward, how about your choices?
All right. Well, first of all, I was going to break these out. Ken, I know we were talking a little bit earlier, but of course, had to break out the CD collection here for a little show and tell. So
Okay.
right there. But so my 5 songs. Here we go. Kind of in chronological order. So the first one that's always stuck with me. And in fact, you guessed it, Ken. But yeah, it was "Beware My Love."
Okay.
Wings Over the Speed of Sound.
Mhm.
The full version on Wings at the Speed of Sound, not I know on the more recent singles set it's been kind of cut down by about like 30 seconds or something like that. A little kind of organ intro, I guess.
Right.
Just perfect. Just his vocals on that, totally rocking vocals, just totally full-throated, very passionate, just the whole thing energizing. It grabs you by the throat, and just doesn't let go. So I think
I love how on Speed of Sound, how it segs from She's My Baby into that with the organ. It just flows so well. That's, it's hard for me to listen to She's My Baby without going into Beware My Love. So
pretty often,
Yeah.
often I do. Yeah, it's just a fantastic song, even though it's a little longer, 6 minutes 30 seconds, something like that.
doesn't feel
Never,
like
never
it.
gets tired. No.
Yeah.
I almost wanted to go on for a few more moments, but that's just me.
Keep going.
So next one, Back on My Feet. I'll never understand why this was never issued on All the Best as like a bonus track. I really think if this had been issued as a single, and especially in the US, I think it would have been a top 10. Really just, again, passionate vocals, great Elvis Costello, Paul McCartney collaboration, fantastic track. It's always held a high spot for me. I've always considered it a classic.
Okay. Great choice.
Yeah.
Keep going.
All right. Well, here we go. Kicked Around No More. I'm kind of surprised this one didn't get on the most recent set. Again, I just have the digital version. I don't have the album set. Wonderful love song. Again, very much in the vein of No More Lonely Nights, but definitely just a wonderful, beautifully constructed song. I can't find any fault with it whatsoever. It should have gone on Off the Ground.
Okay. Yeah.
We
can talk. We could do a show easily on Off the Ground and how all the bonus tracks, so many of them should have been on the album. You'd have to, it could be a tough choice deciding what to take off the album, but so many of what were on those CD singles, oh my God, they're absolutely wonderful. This really fine works from Paul. He should have put out a double album, really.
Yes. The next one actually mentioned, Glenn, I think you mentioned it on the Jenny Wren CD single. but it's what you consider a B-side. I Want You to Fly. I would have put this on not off the ground, excuse me, on Chaos and Creation, probably over English Tea would be my take. Take out English Tea, put this one on the album. I love how it's just psychedelia through a 21st century lens, and you know, it goes along a little more conventional, and then it just hits that part where, you know, it just kicks in. It just really kicks in, and you're off and you're flying.
Interesting. One of the more experimental songs from Paul. Yeah.
And my final one, and again, you know, to echo what you said, Glenn, and I'm sure all of us could agree that, you know, it's tough to do. There's so many songs you can put on, but from Egypt Station, Dominoes, I think one of Paul's better latter day songs, and really just catchy, and I always enjoy it whenever I hear it, whenever I listen to it, quite often. Beautiful song.
No argument with any of your choices. I love the fact that it's a few real current ones there with Dominoes and I Want You to Fly. Well, that would have been, what time would that be? That's 2005, Chaos
Yeah.
and Creation.
Yeah.
So yeah, real good stuff there. It's interesting that very often Paul will put his experimental things on his CD singles or his B-sides, you know, or even going back to like, you know, Secret Friend, you know, something like that, 10-minute piece, something like that. Or I Want You to Fly, Growing Up, Falling Down. What do you think of that track? That's
That's a
definitely
good
very
one.
different. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, like it's kind of a shame. It's a shame that some of this stuff kind of gets relegated to forgotten status. You know, again, these are just ones that, you know, they stand out to me, and I think if more, especially casual fans, I feel, heard them, you just get a better appreciation for Paul's body of work. So that's my take on it.
Okay. Well, I also love English Tea. Just want you to know that.
Noted.
You guys have any opinions about Edward's choices?
You stole one of mine, damn it. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Sorry.
I like the way you balanced in with the Wings tune that was an album track that got a little, I remember getting a little airplay in 76. So much so, actually, we're talking, I don't know, Edward, if you're based in the New York City area or not.
No, Boston area.
Okay. WPLJ in 76, when Wings at the Speed of Sound came out. I remember them playing at least half the album, to the point where I was 11 when it came out. And the concept of the hit single and hearing these songs on WPLJ, I couldn't, so often that I thought it was a hit. It was a B-side, but I thought it was a hit because they were playing Beware My Love a lot. And I remember She's My Baby was initially the tune I seem to remember hearing more than Silly Love Songs and Let 'Em In and the good old days of radio. Anyway, but yeah,
true.
and I like that you dug real deep and actually picked a couple of tunes that I completely forgot existed. And that was Kicked Around No More and I Want You to Fly, only because once the 80s hit, CDs took off, the 7-inch single fizzled out and didn't totally die, but fell between the cracks. You started now, the idea of the B-side was so clouded that you'd have one song was a B-side on this single, but then there was the bonus CD single that had a couple of extra non-album tracks. By the 12-inch in England, you got a couple more of them, and after a while, keeping track of all these songs became virtually impossible. And I think really the album where McCartney really started doing that was, well, Press to Play, but then by Off the Ground, you know, there were more songs floating around out there than there were on the album. So, you know, having you mentioning those are going to make me go digging into my kind of the deep recesses of my CD music room that I don't think I've been in for several years, and blow the dust off those old CD singles that I remember when I got them. Played them all the time, but just when you get so much stuff, you just kind of like these songs got forgotten. I'm proud of the couple that I remembered, and you took one of them. You didn't take it. You picked one of them, and I'm like, I figured there nobody would remember this.
You know
I
what?
didn't realize. My apologies in advance.
No, I'm kidding. I'm joking.
When it comes to McCartney, when Press to Play came out, there were a lot of 12 inches that came out of that. Not so
Okay.
much CD singles. The CD singles really kicked in with Flowers in the Dirt.
Yeah, not CDs yet. Not in that case, right?
Yeah, and but Off the Ground, I mean, I can't think about that album without thinking about the CD singles that accompanied it. It's just impossible because this wealth of material coming out of Paul. And by the way, you and I have talked about WPLJ on things we said today, and they did play virtually every song from
It
Wings
seemed
at the
that
Speed
way,
of
yeah.
Sound. They did play Beware My Love quite a lot.
Yeah.
Not a little, because you know they're also a rock station, and that was probably the rockingest song on Speed of Sound.
Mhm.
And they even played Cook of the House on that station. You know,
That I
I
don't
can't-
remember, but that's great. I mean,
yeah, Time to Hide was a very big
Yeah.
album cut, and so was Wino Junko, in addition to Silly Love Songs and Let 'Em In. So I think they kind of left Silly Love Songs and Let 'Em In to more of the AM stations and the top 40 stations. They still played it, but not as heavily as the other
Mhm.
cuts. And that way it also really gave fans more of an impression of this being a band, because you heard Denny Lane singing Time to Hide, you heard Jimmy McCulloch doing Wino Junko. You know, that was a great time for rock radio.
those were glory days for me as a McCartney and Wings fan. Again, I was 11 when Speed of Sound and Wings Over America came out,
Hmm.
and going to a Bronx Catholic elementary school, it seemed as though everybody in the class,
Yeah.
liked Kiss or disco, and then there was some that liked them both. Then there was little old Darren with Wings, and and drawing the Wings W on all my notebooks, amongst all these Kiss fans and disco fans. It was like, but that was like my glory days. My salad days, learning about all the music, and my band was. I probably got beat up in the schoolyard when I would say my band is bigger than Kiss, but
They were.
Well, also,
that didn't go over too well in grammar school. But anyway,
and I think it just depends where you come into, because again, for me, for us, well, now late 40s, for me, for Gen X, we're kind of like, okay, we didn't necessarily get to hear some of these album cuts until much later in our journey. So when I started
Right.
up in the early 90s, that's when so I didn't get to hear it as really played on radio, at least from my perspective.
Hmm. Yeah, and also the fact that Wings played these songs from Speed of Sound. They played 4 songs from Speed of Sound live. So, it's showcasing the fact that you got Denny Lane here singing Time to Hide, really established the fact that they were a band. It wasn't just Paul McCartney
Mhm.
and 4 other people.
Right.
Anyway, so your 5 choices, Darren.
Mine?
Yeah.
I was supposed to pick 5? No, I'm kidding. Okay, let's kick it off here. Well, let me get this one out of the way. The one that Edward picked that I chose as well was Back on My Feet. And that's a good example of how collecting McCartney in 1987 was starting to get difficult, because if you remember, I think I was still a member. I don't know in 87 if I was still a member of the Wings Fun Club. I'm not even sure if it was called that or they changed the name or not. But I do recall hearing that Paul had been in the studio recording these old rock and roll songs, these classic songs from the 50s, a la John Lennon's rock and roll album. And then Once Upon a Long Ago comes out. And it was going to be the advanced single from the new compilation, New Hits album, All the Best. But,
Right.
and it was, but not in the US, where the decision was made that a Paul McCartney single was not going to play and get airplay and sell. So it was left off the US All the Best album, which had you scrambling to get the UK import single. There wasn't one single. There was 3, I think. There was the 7-inch. Then you had 2 different 12-inch singles that had different length versions of Once Upon a Long Ago. And some of these old rock and roll covers that Paul had been recording that would end up being the Russian album,
Right.
were turning up as bonus tracks or extra B-sides on the 12-inch singles.
They were teasers.
Yeah, I
In
mean,
a way,
today,
yeah.
today I would end up having to go take a nap after I figured all this out. But back in '87, I had a clearer head. The constant with all of those singles was the B-side Back on My Feet. That was on all configurations, CD, vinyl. I'd probably had CD singles popping up too of those records, but I was a little slow to this CD party. So it was all tracking down the 12-inch and 7-inch singles from England.
Yeah.
But Back on My Feet was the first, I believe the first of the McCartney McManus songs that came out.
It was the first that was released.
And it's just a great song. More people should know it. I don't know if it's a hit. I don't know what a hit is anymore. You know what I mean?
No.
And my ears today, opposed to my ears in the 80s. But Once Upon a Long Ago did have 80s hit written on it in my book. I think it would have had a little traction in the US.
It
You know,
made the top 10 in the UK.
Yeah. So Back on
Yeah.
My Feet was the first one I picked. Well, it wasn't the first one, but it was one of the ones I picked. So sort of cut from a similar cloth is a song that I've always loved, that I don't know why I think of it when I listen to Oh Woman, Oh Why, which is quite possibly one of my favorite McCartney songs ever. And I was going to pick it here, but I thought I'm going to be a little different and go with Flying to My Home.
Nice.
The B-side of My Brave Face, 1989. That was right at the end of when an album would come out, a single would be released, the single would be available on vinyl, and it would have a B-side. And Flying to My Home, as McCartney always seemed to do, especially in the 70s, a non-album track for the B-side. Was listening to it recently again, and it's a very different McCartney song, very different from what he was doing on Flowers in the Dirt. His vocal is unique. He never really sung in that voice before. Kind of a tough song. That's why I probably think of Oh Woman, Oh Why, because that was a tough rock song that was on the B-side of more of a melodic song like Another Day.
Yeah.
Same could, I guess, be said for Flying to My Home, Backing My Brave Face. And then it just drifted away. It didn't turn up anywhere else for a long time. So Flying to My Home has always been a favorite. And the singles box set that just came out kind of helped me. Oh, yeah. I always liked that one. So
I always kind of felt like Flying to My Home had a Ram quality to it.
Yeah, I don't like the beginning of it. I have this thing that as years have passed, I am less and less tolerant of the 80s production or anything 80s-ish. I know that we've talked about this, and it's not fair to penalize a song or an artist or an album just because it's got 80s production. Some of 80s production, depending on the band, I love. But I guess it's an artist that I'm not used to having synths and layers of echo and whatnot and little electronic trickery. Our artists that I'm not used to that treatment tend to be the artists that I don't like going back and rediscovering some of the stuff from that period, if that made any sense of what I just said.
No, I know what you're saying, but you're not
So-
alone in that sentiment.
Yeah, that kind of like that, and that's taken away a little bit. The bump cameras up here, wherever it is. It's taken away a little bit from Flowers in the Dirt for me, a little bit, because it sounds a little too polished. And I've been spoiled with some of the more recent McCartney records, which I like when he's puts a little polish on it, but there's still rough spots.
Okay.
Maybe why I like Driving Rain, maybe more than Flowers in the Dirt, at least today.
Okay.
Maybe not.
So production matters that much to you?
I hate to say it, but it does. And I don't mean it to be something that, especially with McCartney, I don't know why. I think Paul was trying a little too hard in the 80s to be contemporary and hooking up with guys like Hugh Padgham and Phil Ramone. And I don't know, sometimes it didn't gel. 80s Elton John, some great songs that I would have preferred hearing what they would have happened if those songs came out in 1974.
With that kind of production.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I don't know. And I'm a walking, I'm Chicago fanatic. And, still a lot of, when Chicago 17 came out and I'm hearing all these drum machines and stuff, I'm like, it sounds like them computerized too much a little bit. I wasn't ready for, and still kind of never listened to an album that at one time I loved. Anyway, on to McCartney. Country Dreamer from Wings.
Wow.
Let me interject. I
Yes.
think that's a great.
Wait, where'd
Not
you go?
hearing you audio wise.
Wait, you gotta.
We lost.
Oh, his voice went again. Jeff Lynne's back outside Glenn's house. Come on, Jeff.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say,
Okay,
Glenn?
now we hear you.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
We're losing your audio.
All right, hold that thought, Glenn, because you're breaking up again. Hold that thought, because you're.
Oh, well, I don't want to interrupt.
No,
Um,
I want to hear what you have to say.
I know. Well, am I freezing?
No,
You
now
know?
you
Now you're okay.
froze.
Oh.
Now you're okay. Keep going.
Technology.
Yeah.
There's this guy on YouTube, Rick Beato, and
Yes.
he talks about music. He talks about production. Am I frozen? Yes.
You
I'm
you
frozen.
freeze occasionally, but
I'll
keep going.
text you guys.
We're losing you there.
Yeah, Glenn.
I'm sure you're
sorry.
going to come back. No. I think we got you.
Whoop, that was wild.
I was gonna say I'm losing you, but that's John Lennon. Sorry.
When you go back and Glenn, when you go back and watch this, you just
Okay.
an amazing thing hopping up off the bed there.
I love that. I'm
Okay.
afraid to start.
Now you're
but,
good.
Now you're fine.
Rick Beato, this guy on YouTube, he's a producer, and he took John Bonham drum track soloed, and he puts it into a sequencer and a beat detector, they call them, things that straighten out, make beats perfectly in time, absolutely mathematically perfect, and you can hear that it's nowhere near as exciting. John Bonham's drums, if they're perfected, when they're perfected. So that goes along with, Darren, what you're talking about with production and stuff like that. I think that, I think cleaning everything up can be a mistake. That's it.
Is he the guy? Is he a guitarist who? I think I was watching him recently I was watching an older video of him a couple of years ago where he was actually playing his top 25 guitar solos of all time.
Yeah.
And then he did a whole
Yeah.
thing on auto tuning.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So I got to go look for that. All right. I just discovered him like 2 weeks ago.
He's done some
pretty good.
amazing videos and great interviews. He just did a 2-hour interview with Steve Lukather. He interviewed Peter Frampton. He's interviewed Sting. Really good in-depth interviews. I would highly recommend Rick Beato.
Okay. Yeah. I just found him. So now
Yeah.
I've got me something to watch tonight. All right. So my third song was Country Dreamer, recorded during Red Rose Speedway sessions in 72. Came out in 73, B-side of Hell on Wheels. That's just a classic McCartney melody. Again, an instance where the guy would write these, he'd eat dinner and belch songs out that were more melodic than what, some of the great writers could come up with. I mean, you kidding me? Country Dreamer. So, and that was on the B-side of Hell on Wheels. I was 8 years old. Hell on Wheels was one of the first singles I ever bought of McCartney's. And so that has a soft spot in my heart. Then we come over here, and I won't go talk too long about this song because we brought it up already, and it's becoming a greatest hit for us, Little Lamb Dragonfly. So no need to kind of sit on that more because I agree with everything that had been said already about the song. We've talked about it on Things We Said Today about how we all worship that song. And then at the end here, I will admit making a mistake because I did pick cover accidentally, and it was reason I picked it was similar to why Glenn picked Lovers That Never Were, the demo version. McCartney's vocal on Shake a Hand from Run Devil Run, and some of the vocals on Run Devil Run. You know, I always thought it might have been a little cathartic because he was coming out of, you know, the period after Linda died, that album. But I tell people, yeah, it's covers. There's some originals in there, and they're good songs. They're not all-time great McCartney songs, but they're good songs. But you listen to Run Devil Run, and then you tell me that Paul McCartney shouldn't be ranked amongst the best rock and roll singers of all time, and including the Robert Plants, the Paul Rodgers, the Roger Daltrys. You know, there seems to be a thing, and Lennon was a brilliant singer and also belongs in that group. But when push comes to shove, I've often said, you know, I think McCartney had the ability to hold his own against all of those guys.
Absolutely.
And if not, occasionally, maybe even top them because of the versatility of his voice. And when he would let loose, oh, darling, I'm down.
Helter Skelter.
Wow. You know what I mean? And that's one of the reasons why in recent years, it actually pains me a little to hear him struggle, because what that voice did in the past. Okay, before I start crying, let me continue on here with, I was confused with the last one. So I scribbled down 3 ideas. There were 2 ballads, and we've talked about this, how I've often felt that so many people, rightly so, love the tug of war, Pipes of Peace period, and hold tug of war up with such high regard, and deservedly so. But that's like my least favorite period for Paul, because I felt a lot of what he was doing at that time was kind of like the soft hit, middle of the road ballady period of time. Yet coming out of there, I chose in my list here Only Love Remains from Press to Play, 86, and a few years before that, 83, from Pipes of Peace, Through Our Love. Whether or not they would have been hits had they come out 10 years earlier, I don't know. But this is the same guy that wrote The Long and Winding Road and My Love, and 2 songs actually that maybe suffered a little, in my opinion, from 80s production. If they were more spared down and stripped down, Through Our Love and Only Love Remains, I kind of think of them similar because they were released also very close to one another, as being songs that people who talk about how great McCartney was as a songwriter, those should be songs that should be mentioned. And then I just scribbled down the second version of Figure of 8 from Flowers in the Dirt, but the second version had some more teeth on it, the one that came out. I can't even, I don't remember, what was it? It was a single. It was different from the album version. It came out as the single.
It was a much rougher, rockier version.
And longer.
Yeah.
You know, I always tended to gravitate to the longer. Wait, that doesn't sound right. The longer songs. You know, I don't know. You know, the disco version of Good Night Tonight, I always played more than the 7-inch version.
Okay. Wasn't not Finding My Home? Wasn't Figure of 8? Wasn't that Bob Clearmountain that did that mix?
Yes.
7-inch mix?
Yep. The more rockinger one, which I prefer any day. It's just the one on Flowers in the Dirt is way too, I don't know. It's doesn't have guts to it. You know, you need one rocker on Flowers in the Dirt. Like, you know, Tug of War still had ballroom dancing. You need a ballroom dancing on Flowers in the Dirt, you know, although there's some edgy moments and We Got Married. But yeah, so I'm very proud of you there, Darren, because you mentioned some songs that I've been praising for God knows how long. I'm going to mention my 5 very quickly. I did say Little Lamb Dragonfly. You know, there is something to be said about these songs that seem so effortless from Paul. And melodically, it's so exquisite how all, like I said before, everything flows so well. There's all these different sections, and it's like it was written as one piece. It actually came from the Ram sessions. It started off from Ram, and it was planned to be for Rupert originally for the full-length animated film. But it's such a beautiful song. Paul's vocals are just amazing, and the whole arrangement of it is just wonderful. Only Love Remains I put in there. I think it's quite possibly It could be his greatest love song in his solo career, From Press to Play. I've never felt that it was overproduced in any way, but it's such a great melody. McCartney's vocals are just soaring, especially in the middle bit of the song. The lyrics are just fantastic. I don't want to turn this into a 1-hour discussion about production, but I understand what people are saying about 80s production and all. I happen to love the 80s very much. I love the sounds of the 80s. I never felt like it was overdone with Paul. Certain songs on Press to Play really have a more traditional sound, like Only Love Remains, or something like Footprints, Move Over Busker. When you're talking about heavy drum sounds and synthesizers, there's some songs on there, like definitely Press, Good Times Coming, Feel the Sun, definitely Talk More Talk, and Pretty Little Head. But I like when Paul experiments and works with different producers and doesn't, rely on the same old formula or the same old sound. And there are times when he goes back to his old sound, like Flaming Pie or Chaos and Creation. I think Nigel Godrich, when it came to Chaos and Creation, wanted something that was closer in style to maybe the first McCartney album, but still sounding very contemporary for that moment. And I think it worked very well, that collaboration with Nigel Godrich there. But Only Love Remains is an outstanding song. And I didn't put Through Our Love on there, but I easily could have. It was one of my wedding songs. And it's a great melody, and McCartney's vocals are outstanding. Maybe a little bit too produced from George Martin with all the brass that comes on towards the end, but the great big buildup, with Paul's vocals, he's a master at, as the song continues towards the end, he'll sing a higher note than he did before. He's not alone in doing that. Whatever you will be mine. It's so effective in that song. I do think that it's high time, especially with all the respect given to Ram these days. I think Backseat of My Car is a masterpiece. That's another one of those songs where it just sounds like a lot of different songs strung together, and yet they all flow together so well. Has a Beach Boys feel to it, and the big scream at the end, talking about a buildup. It's such a masterful song compositionally and production wise. Talk about love songs. I think Some Days is a masterpiece.
Yeah.
From Flaming Pie. I mean, there's so many songs where I like to do this every now and then. If they were on a Beatles album and they sounded exactly the same as they did the way Paul released it, they would be classics now. If Some Days was on the White Album, that would be one of the songs people would be pointing to, like, this is one of the greatest songs on the White Album. Great acoustic tune. The whole sound of it, George Martin was involved with the production of that. And I always like to rave about, and in the last show that I did here on this channel, it was like a tie of the two best songs from Paul in this century. I put The End of the End from Memory Almost Full, which I think is so brilliant and very courageous of him to talk about how he'd want the world to react to his death when it happens, that he'd want it to be more celebration, like an Irish wake. And the lyrics of it are so poetic. It's a brilliant piece of music. It's just stripped down to Paul on a piano, a little bit of orchestration from the keyboards, and some whistling, and a very bold move on his part to take a look at his own mortality. And I would never expect him ever to do the song live, but how can you not be moved with a song like that?
I can't listen to that song actually because it's too much. Serious,
It's
emotionally
depressing. Yeah.
Yeah.
To think about that. And I also did put in a tie with The End of the End, Jenny Wren, because it is I love great acoustic songs with great finger picking, and the melodies amazing. And there is an instrument which we couldn't think of in the previous show called a duduk, D-U-D-U-K. It's got kind of a flute sound to it,
Right,
but
that's
is
right.
It's haunting, it's chilling, it's just, I don't know how he picked that instrument. He knew the right one to use, but it's an absolutely gorgeous song that he called Daughter of Blackbird. And I can understand why he felt that way. It's another one that I would call a masterpiece. It's one of the greatest songs of his solo career. And as far as I'm concerned, the ones that we're mentioning could easily be considered among the greatest of his entire career. So, anyone have something to say about my choices?
I didn't mean to start laughing on you there at the tail end, because I did look up the instrument you were talking about, and
Yeah,
the phonetic and the 10-year-old in me came out, because it's actually pronounced the duduk.
is
And
it? Okay.
I have all kinds of fun with that. But a lot of what you're saying, Ken, now I know, because these are a lot of the same songs and opinions, and I know you're very tolerant to the 80s production, which I admire, because it occasionally will actually ruin the listening experience for me with certain bands. Not so much McCartney. But we ended up picking 4 lists here, where there were some common
Repeats.
denominators.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, mostly everyone picked something that was unique, and I think that speaks volumes for the writer that we were just talking about and the artist that we were just talking about and his scope as an artist. So,
It's not easy when you've got a catalog this massive.
No.
To narrow it down to just 5. But I am hoping on this channel to do shows on John, George, and Ringo, and do more of each of the 4 of them in their solo careers, and do it on the group as well, to give some attention to these songs. But when you're dealing with someone who not only has given us a lot quantity-wise, but a lot of great stuff quality-wise, and so versatile, and there's so many different sides to him. There's a part of me that loves the rockers, and you want to hear more of the rockers, like you've all said, and I certainly agree with you there. And there's a side of me that loves his ballads and loves him doing We All Stand Together. This different voice that's so suitable for a children's animated film. He's got a lot of different voices. You were talking about the versatility of Paul's voice. So many different sides, and his falsetto voice, which I like a lot, on Girlfriend or So Bad, those kind of things. But these are all excellent choices. I want to thank the 3 of you for your contributions to the show. I didn't mention, by the way, with you, Glenn, there is a show that you have coming up with the Weeklings at City Winery. I just remembered.
City Winery.
Yes, that's February 5th. You're actually 2 days before Denny Lane at the City Winery. So just go and live in New York City, near City Winery, for those few days.
It's close.
Yeah. And in the description box, I'm going to be putting up links in case you want to explore Edward's podcast, Call Me Mr. Broadstreet, all of Glenn's work, what's going on with the Weeklings, and of course, Darren, his Facebook page, things we said today, whatever Darren wants to share with us. And this has been fantastic. I loved having this conversation with the 3 of you, and hopefully it's enlightening to our viewers. And if some of you don't know this music, it's a lot more to Paul than those hits. And even some of the hits that didn't do well should have done well. Jenny Wren, there was a time, and I talk about this in many of my podcasts, when the way that radio works is that top 40 radio tends to play artists when they're younger and gradually phase them out, regardless of how good the music is. And I think a lot of those because they're concerned about their demographics and reaching a young audience, and they figure that as artists get older, that audience that they're shooting for is not going to care about someone in their 40s or 50s. So what a lot of artists have to do, and I think Elton John has been the most successful at this, and people like Rod Stewart, they try to move on to another format like adult contemporary, where they do very well. But you talk about songs and whether or not they should have been big hits. A lot of these songs that we're talking about could have been hits in the 70s, or maybe the first half of the 80s, when Paul was getting a lot of airplay still on top 40 radio. And you certainly know a lot about that, Glenn, with all the long music career that you've had, and Darren being the radio guy that you've been, and studying how radio works. So, you know, there have been many times when we've said on our podcast shows, gee, you know, The World Tonight, that would have been a hit in the 70s, but Top 40 is not going to play that song in 1997, no matter how good it is. But these songs should be noticed anyway, regardless of whether they're hits or not, or album cuts. And another thing that we bring up on our podcast is how some of Paul's best works are B-sides, or they're songs that were put on CD singles. You know, some of Paul's B-sides are better than a lot of artists' A-sides. And so, you know, that's the kind of stuff that we discover here and talk about on this show. And just want to thank you guys for doing this.
Thank you for asking. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah.
Honored to yap with you cats.
Anytime you want to come on, Glenn, talk about the latest Weeklings news and latest release, you know, feel free to. Love to have you chat about Beatles. Same thing with you, Edward, and Darren. I'm always seeing Darren.
Yeah, you see too much of me. That's all right.
There's no such thing as too much Darren DeVivo.
Oh,
Anyway.
I have a lot of people actually that would actually disagree with that. Some of them are in this house actually right now.
Okay. Maybe we'll have them all on it one
We should
time
do
in
a
a
show like
podcast.
my family, make it a roast.
It'll be
All
like
righty.
the Dean
Thank you.
Martin roasts.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for asking me. Great meeting you, Edward, Glenn. Pleasure. I've always admired you for many years and your work and
Everything. And don't forget, I've just seen a face, new single from the Weeklings. Watch
Mhm.
the video on YouTube, buy the single, keep looking for more Weeklings music. Just as singles for the moment, anyway. Thank you guys. Thanks to all of you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Peace and love.